Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, where we discuss infamous cases of death and murder that have an element of food to them, and then we cook or sample the food from the case. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. In 1893, one of the biggest events to occur that century in America took place, the World Fair in Chicago. Thousands and thousands of people came from all over the country, traveling for weeks at a time to see the incredible sights, hear the music, watch the entertainment, and taste the food. What none of them knew is that not too far from the grounds of the World's Fair, one of the most evil, heartless, and prolific serial killers of all time was snatching travelers off the street and killing them in his hotel turned torture chamber and murder factory. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire on May 16, 1861. He graduated school at the age of 16 and married the first of his 4 wives in 1878. He enrolled at University of Vermont and then University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery, where he graduated in 1884, fully trained in anatomy with an apprenticeship in dissection. When a little boy, who had been seen with Holmes off and on that same year, disappeared, nothing was thought of their connection. If only they had paid a little more attention, they could have saved the life of the next little boy, who died from poisoning after taking medicine given to him by H.H. Holmes, who was then working at a pharmacy. After this event, Holmes quickly moved out of the area to Chicago and changed his name from his birth name to Henry Howard Holmes to avoid prosecution. When Holmes arrived in Chicago in August of 1886, he quickly finds a job at Elizabeth Holton's drugstore at the corner of South Wallace and West 63rd. He eventually purchased the store, and then Holton and her husband vanished, but people disagree on whether or not Holmes made them vanish. Holmes then purchased an empty lot across from his drugstore and began construction of a 2-story mixed-use building with retail space and a new drugstore on the first floor and apartments on the second floor. Now that sounds normal enough, right? Until you find out that the structure eventually became known as the Murder Castle. A creditor who had loaned money to Holmes for the construction died suddenly, and shortly before Holmes announced he was adding a 3rd floor to the structure that would serve as a hotel for guests of the upcoming Chicago World's Fair. By 1892, the hotel was somewhat completed with 3 stories and a basement. The retail space was on the first floor as planned. The second floor and its planned apartments? Well, that never came to be. Instead, Holmes filled the second floor with elaborate torture rooms, each containing a body chute that went directly to the basement. The 3rd floor never became a hotel. It became a maze of hallways and small soundproof rooms. The hallways never led out to an exit, and some of them went nowhere at all. Each of the 3rd floor rooms also featured a body chute that went directly to the basement. On the basement floor sat vats of acid, quicklime, and a crematorium where Holmes could quickly dispose of the many bodies that would begin accumulating in his murder castle. He first killed his mistress, Julia Smythe, and her daughter Pearl, who disappeared on Christmas Eve, 1891. Another of Holmes' girlfriends, Emmeline Segrande, began working in the building and disappeared in December of 1892. Edna Van Tassel met the same fate. In early 1893, actress Minnie Williams moved to Chicago and began working for Holmes. Her sister Annie came to visit her. Both women vanished in July of 1893. Construction workers vanished, children vanished, retail employees working on the first floor vanished, and a lot of tourists and visitors to the Chicago World's Fair vanished. Where were they all going? Into the basement. Holmes' usual murder method was suffocation of his victims by chloroform or gas fumes while trapped in an airless vault he had built. Other victims were starved to death. Some were burned alive. Some bodies were stripped of their flesh, dissected, and turned into skeletons that Holmes would then sell to medical labs and schools. He used the vats of acid to dispose of everything but the bones. I've read a lot about H.H. Holmes, watched a lot of documentaries, and whenever I think of him, I kind of picture him as like a machine. He didn't seem to have any interpersonal relationships. Everywhere he went, death and destruction rapidly followed. He just kind of mowed everything down in his path and destroyed everything that he came into contact with. Holmes allegedly attempted to burn down the murder castle when he felt that the authorities were looking into him, but all that did was serve to put them on his trail. He'd been accused of not paying creditors and having shady dealings, but the fire and the investigation put enough pressure on him that he decided to leave Chicago in July of 1894. He reappears in Fort Worth with a deed in hand that showed him as the owner of a piece of property owned by Minnie and Annie, the sisters who vanished while at his murder castle. He sells this property and then turns up in St. Louis, where he is arrested and jailed for the first time on the charge of selling mortgaged goods, meaning things that didn't belong to him. While he is in jail for a short period, he meets a man named Marion Hedgepeth and tells him that he has a plan to take out a $10,000 life insurance policy on himself and then fake his own death. Holmes promises Hedgepeth a $500 commission in exchange for the name of a shady lawyer who could make the deal happen. Hedgepeth sends Holmes to Jephthah Howe, an attorney who thought Holmes' scheme was brilliant. Their first attempt at the scheme failed, so the pair set out to find others willing to help them in their plan. Instead of helping them, these people became Holmes' victims, and he murdered them after taking out life insurance policies on them. Benjamin Pitezel started out as an accomplice and ended up as a victim. His wife and children met the same fate, with Holmes reporting he put two of Benjamin's children in a trunk with a hole drilled in it. He then inserted a hose through the hole and attached the other end to a gas line to asphyxiate the girls. This man was a monster. That actually makes me feel kind of sick. That is just terrible. These poor victims would eventually be found rotting in the basement cellar of a Toronto home. Everywhere he went, death and destruction followed. Holmes' murder spree finally ended when he was arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, after being hunted down by the famous Pinkertons. He was held on an outstanding warrant for horse theft from his brief time in Fort Worth, Texas. He is then tied to the two girls' bodies, and police begin a formal investigation of his past. Police raid his murder castle, but much of the evidence of his torture rooms has disappeared. He is tied to the Benjamin Pitezel murder and is put on trial for that murder. He is found guilty and sentenced to death. By this time, it has become evident that H.H. Holmes murdered Pitezel's children, the Williams sisters, and many others for a total of 27 confirmed murders, but no one believes that to be the actual number of people killed. Most people who have studied this serial killer believe his number of victims to be upwards of 200. Holmes goes on to give various contradictory accounts of his life, sometimes claiming innocence and other times claiming to be possessed by the devil. The good old devil. He always seems to be around right when somebody needs to blame him for something. What would we do without him? Holmes even claimed while in prison that his face had physically began to change. He writes a letter stating he now appears gruesome and taking a standalone cast, stating that after everything he had done, he was beginning to resemble the devil himself. On May 7, 1896, H.H. Holmes was hanged for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. Ironically, he asked that his coffin be contained in cement and buried 10 feet deep because he was concerned grave robbers would dig him up and dissect his body. That's what he was worried about? These are the kinds of people we wish we could execute more than once. Although we can't do that, Holmes did suffer. When he was hanged, his neck did not snap. Instead, he strangled to death slowly, twitching and swinging for over 15 minutes before he was finally pronounced dead 20 minutes after the hangman's trap had been sprung. H.H. Holmes has been written about many times. He has been portrayed in movies and television and documentaries and has become the boogeyman, a Baba Yaga of sorts in internet lore and stories of torture, mutilation, and murder. In August of 1895, the murder castle mysteriously burnt to the ground. It is widely believed that 2 arsonists did away with the macabre landmark. As if this story were not gruesome enough, in 2017, H.H. Holmes' body is exhumed after decades of rumors that he had somehow escaped execution. Because his coffin had been encased in cement, he had not decomposed normally. When the coffin was opened, there lay H.H. Holmes, his clothes in almost perfect condition and his mustache intact. The killer was positively identified by his teeth and then reburied. Well, that is a perfectly morbid ending to a perfectly morbid story. We may do a deeper dive on Mr. H.H. Holmes down the road, but right now, as we always do here on this channel, we are going to explore the connection between these cases of death, murder, and food. So stay with me as we explore the culinary creations that were first introduced in the Chicago World's Fair that you still eat today. You might be surprised at what some of these foods are. Maybe you won't be. But either way, we're going to talk about them right now as we go dining with death. Are you surprised at all of this? I was. I thought, this was so long ago. We probably don't eat much of the things, many of the products that we ate back then. It's a lot of stuff. It's so much stuff that I can barely fit it all in. So give me a second. I'm going to clear this out a little bit and then we're going to talk about each item. Let's just kind of go one by one and talk about each of these products that have been around for almost 150 years. Cracker Jacks were introduced at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, along with all of the other foods I'm going to show you. F.W. Ruckheim and his brother Louis were the first to add peanuts to popcorn, and it became a sensation. Louis discovered kind of a new process that kept the molasses from sticking together in the box, and it revolutionized this little snack. I haven't had that for a really long time. Here's the prize. It says Lift and Peel. Unlock classic games. So I think it's like an app. Boy, that has come a ways since I had Cracker Jacks. And I think this is a sticker. A sticker. That's my prize. Aunt Jemima pancake mix. Now, this is a brand that has struggled a little bit with its identity for, kind of using some stereotypes that are not so good, but the pancakes are really good. Nancy Green was the person that they hired to portray Aunt Jemima at the World's Fair. She was one of the first Black corporate models in America. After her, they hired a lot of other actresses to portray Aunt Jemima, as they went around to different towns and things to sell their product, but Nancy Green was the original. The display became so popular at the World's Fair that Nancy had to have her own private security. Vienna beef hot dogs. There were hot dogs, but there weren't Vienna beef hot dogs before the World's Fair. Gotta have a good hot dog once in a while. Oh yeah. Now, if you notice, Vienna beef still says Chicago's favorite hot dog on it. Well, this is why. It was introduced there. Austrian-Hungarian brothers-in-law Emil Reichel and Samuel Ladany came to Chicago in 1893 to sell their homemade beef sausages that they called Vienna beef. The sausages were a sensation, so much so that the brothers stayed in Chicago and opened up stores. They called it the Vienna Sausage Company. Now, I found conflicting information on whether or not they have anything to do with Vienna sausages. As we know them here in the States, they're little things that come in a can. So if you know, feel free to comment and let me know on that, whether it's just the hot dogs or if Vienna sausages came from somewhere else. Heinz condiments. Can you believe that? It's kind of like a lot of these brands that were introduced there. It was such a big event that they got stuck in the American consciousness and just kind of never left. So the company founder, HJ Heinz, got stuck on the second floor of one of the exposition halls and nobody was coming to his booth. He knew he had a good product with his ketchup and his mustard, but he couldn't get anybody to come try it. So he hired boys to run around the Chicago World's Fair and shout, "Come to Heinz booth on the second floor and you'll win a prize." More than 1 million people eventually made their way to the Heinz booth, and the prize was a small pin that went on the lapel that was shaped like a pickle. The crowds were supposedly so big around the Heinz booth that the floor began to sag and you could see it from the ground floor. Pabst beer. Now, this is truly an American classic. It was actually brewed before the Chicago World's Fair, but they introduced their lighter version of the beer and claimed that they won the blue ribbon there. There's a little bit of discussion on whether or not they actually won a blue ribbon, but that's where the blue ribbon came from. They claimed they were the blue ribbon winning beer at the Chicago World's Fair. Yep, that's Pabst. I haven't had one of those in a really long time. Wrigley's Chewing Gum. The company that makes this initially was making baking powder, and they would give away free sticks of gum with the purchase of baking powder. But the gum soon became more popular than the baking powder. This flavor, juicy fruit, was introduced at the Chicago World's Fair, and it was a smash hit. And, you know, we still chew a lot of this gum today. Shredded wheat was introduced at the World Fair, and it was sold as a digestive aid for people who had stomach troubles. They said, you know, if you had problems with digestion, indigestion, stomach ache, that shredded wheat would actually help with that. You know, we know that that's not really very true, but the cereal has stuck around forever. And, you know, it's one of those things I can definitely leave. You know, frosted mini wheats, if it's got some sugar on it, I might be game. But these are, you know, best left to go in like, you know, that mix that you make at Christmas. Cream of wheat was also introduced at the World's Fair. This is a staple in many American households. My kids grew up eating this. It's just something that you can make really, really quickly. They even have an instant version now. It fills you up, it's warm, it's quick, and it's super convenient. Hershey's chocolate. Now, Hershey's was a company before the World's Fair, but they were mainly making caramel. When Milton Hershey attended the World's Fair, he saw a new apparatus that was used for making chocolate, and he became so enamored with the device that he decided to try it. He purchased the entire setup for chocolate production, and that's how the Hershey bar was born. Brownies were introduced at the Chicago World's Fair as well. Now, these brownies are a little different than the ones we eat today, and this recipe will be available on my website, diningwithdeath.com, for you to try. The brownies were created in the Palmer House kitchen. It was a hotel, and the wife of the owner wanted something special to put out for the World's Fair. So she had her chef come up with this recipe. And again, like I said, it'll be available for you guys to try if you want. It's a little different. It's got walnuts on top and an apricot glaze. So please let me know if you try it. Just a sec. I was pretty surprised that so many of the foods that were introduced so long ago have survived this long. And I think it's kind of amazing that they're all tied to this incredibly evil and cruel serial killer. I hope you enjoyed that little walk through the past, and I want to thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death. You guys give me a lot of support and a lot of feedback, and I appreciate every bit of it. I sure appreciate it when you like and subscribe as well. It helps us a lot. It really, really does. So stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.